Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you joining us in the middle of what is the first snow, I think, in Davos this week. So I think for the closing couple of days here, it's nice to see it. My name is Jen Steinman. I run our sustainability business globally for Deloitte, and very much looking forward to this wonderful panel today. I'll start with making a couple of comments about what we're going to talk about today, a little bit of context, and then we'll get into a great panel discussion. Our panelists will introduce themselves in a moment. So we're here to discuss the transformative power of circularity, which is something that is taking on more and more of a pivotal role as we look across all industries. And I think what we're starting to see is that circularity is really no longer a buzzword. It's a fundamental shift in how we design, produce, consume. And a lot of what we'll talk about today will really get into the core of that. Deloitte's been working with Circular Economy quite a bit over the last several years, and we worked together to produce a circularity gap report. And so I'm going to share with you some of the statistics, which I think are pretty staggering. So notwithstanding the fact that we are spending a lot of time working on circularity, the global population consumed more than 500 billion tons of material, nearly as many materials as were consumed during the entire 20th century over the past 6 years. So that's just a staggering number. So that points to how much work we have to do as a society. And the research that we've done with Circular Economy, it shows that we're projected to help reduce emissions by 40% and generate nearly 2 billion jobs if we start over the next several years to focus on this area. So there's been a lot of conversation this week about global regulations. Are they helping? Are they not helping? How do we come together to adopt standards that are consistent globally? But as global regulations do tighten and stakeholder pressures rise, so businesses are actually starting to look at circularity more and more. And what we're starting to see is that circular practices actually can unlock some significant revenue streams. So Deloitte's Circular Economy Alliance allows us to extend our relationships across a broader scope of industries, and we get to see what is actually happening. I'm also really pleased today that we have the Global Fashion Agenda represented, and we've done our first market initiative together, which we're really excited about. And we announced our collaboration earlier this month. And so what we're trying to do with that collaboration is set a global agenda on sustainability in fashion, raise awareness, educate, and convene and foster innovation, which is absolutely what's required to drive a more circular economy. So today we're going to talk a little bit about all of this, and I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll get into some questions. Thank you.
Very much.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you can hear me well. My name is Federica Marchionni. I'm the CEO of Global Fashion Agenda, or we call it GFA to abbreviate, and I will tell you more about GFA in a second. Please.
Thank you for having me on the panel. My name is Mark de Wit. I'm with Circular Economy. We're an impact organization based in Amsterdam, and we help national city governments throughout the globe to transition to circularity. But more importantly, I lead the work to do that with supply chains, like the mining industry, like fashion, and like retail, agri-food, to help them transition to circularity. And also very pleased to be here. As Jennifer just mentioned, we launched our Circularity Gap Report for the last 2 years together with Deloitte, and we just finalized the analysis, and we'll launch the next one in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, in May of this year together. So I can tell you that we're still in reverse. The statistic looks very bleak, so particularly interested to today see how we can accelerate with many businesses here in the audience.
Thank you.
So I'm Cecilia Dalacqua. I'm a sustainability partner in Deloitte Spain, and my specialization is circularity at the consumer industry, so helping our clients to understand where to prioritize, where to put focus, and how they can accelerate this transition.
Thank you for your introduction. Cecilia, I'm going to start with you and setting the context, and can you talk to us a little bit about the regulatory environment as we step into this conversation?
Yeah, Jen, thank you. As you were saying, the regulation is tightening, right? And in circularity, what we have been seeing is that the regulation is going to go across all the life cycle of the product, right? So we are going to see regulations coming for circular designs, such as the Eco Design Directive. And here the companies will need to reflect and do strategic choices around, for example, durability, repairability, recyclability, and what materials they are going to use to enable this transition. But also, regulation is coming to the end of life, and we are seeing an extent of the extended product responsibility for new categories, such as, for example, textile, that brings a lot of challenge into the sector on how to manage all this waste and across the value chain and across the globe, but also into specific categories, such as, for example, the end of life of vehicles or even the batteries, right? So the accountability of the manufacturers across the life cycle of the product is going to increase a lot. But not only this, we are seeing as well needs for more disclosure with the CCRD and the ESR5. So companies are need to disclose how circular are their procedures or how circular are their process. And finally, a more transparent and traceability with the digital product passport. So as you can see, it's a context that goes across all the value chain and across all the life cycle of the products. But it's not only about market regulation, I think, and we are going to talk about this. We are seeing as well the consumers. They are making the shift as well on this, on the market, and they are requiring companies to think about how they are going to meet their needs. We have seen in consumer insights from Deloitte that Gen Zs and millennials, they are prioritizing products that are able to have a higher value in the resale. For example, 30% of these new generations are looking at this before buying, right? So this is another driver that companies should take into account on this in this process. So as a general context, I think that the take, make, waste model is not only outdated, but it's going to be costly, right? And companies need to start thinking about how they can transform and accelerate these circularity principles into their companies by making, for example, targets or measuring the circularity in their business. And I think this is the interesting part, right? The World Business Council, together with Deloitte and in Circular Economy, we have been working in a global circularity protocol in order to enable companies to start defining these targets and accelerate this transition through specific KPIs. So I think we are going to see a lot of changes, but companies need to prioritize, put focus, and measure. I think this is the most setting the scene that around circularity.
Thank you. Mark, we'll turn to you next. There is a pretty substantive gap between the commitments companies have made globally and action that they're taking. Can you talk a little bit about what impact a circular economy approach can have on reducing emissions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you just mentioned, Cecilia, the global circularity protocol, which needs to become the equivalent of the greenhouse gas protocol, which of course we've had into play for more than 20 years, have really showed us, let's say, the different scopes of how a product releases emissions into the air. So either it's your direct facilities, but the majority of the emissions are when it is at the consumer, when you transport it from your factory to the consumer, when they use it, when they discard it. In some supply chains, that is more than 50%, but in some consumer facing, it's more than 90%. So a lot of those emissions are directly related to how you handle materials, how you treat your waste, how you produce in the first place. And what we have seen is that the circular economy on the global scale, if you would double circularity, it can cut global emissions by 40%, but in many supply chains, it can cut it by more than 90%. So it's incredibly important that circular strategies are not only related to the materials, but it serves climate mitigation, as well as improving the levels of biodiversity and pollution in general. So it's really one of the key solutions to work on to mitigate, let's say, all of those elements at the same time.
You know, it's interesting because I think sometimes the conversation is a little bit bifurcated. You hear about circularity in different contexts, but you're bringing it together and showing that there's solutions there to be had for organizations. Federica, I think we talk a little bit about the challenges, but I would love to hear from you what you think some of the exciting innovations are happening in the fashion industry around circularity.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And let me say first about GFA. I was very fast before to introduce myself, but who is Global Fashion Agenda and why we do that? And then I come to the innovation question that is exciting, finally, because GFA was actually originated in Denmark, in Copenhagen, when COP in 2009 came in the city, COP15, and there were no discussion about fashion, about textile on the agenda. And what was decided then to create a side event similar that is happening here at Davos to discuss about the impact of the fashion industry in the world in terms of mainly at the beginning was more on the environmental side, but we also take care of social sides currently. So why that? Because, and many probably of you don't know that the fashion industry is responsible for approximately, if you combine all together the textile, 4% of the total global emissions. So just to give you another element of reference, could be the economy, the entire economy emissions made by Germany, UK, and Spain together. And so that is one of the reasons why it was important to focus and say, okay, how can we transition from what we have today and reduce the emissions? So how much we need to reduce to stay to the 1.5 degrees Celsius that is the limit on the Paris Agreement. I don't want to open a chapter here, but you know that we can discuss about that too. So what is the action that the fashion industry needed to take? So we started with educating the entire, from the consumer today are coming on board, but we needed to educate first the responsibles, so the brands, the people inside the company, to let them understand what was the impact of their action. And so education was one part, and we did, and we continuously doing with different tools. Now, while the mission is to transform the industry to become net positive, so giving back to society and the planet that we take out, we divided our work into 5 priorities. 2 are environmentals, 2 are social, and in the middle, as a key point, is circularity. Why that? Because internally we have this way to measure our progress in divided in people, planet, and circular economy, which is the business. This is one of the biggest elements that we need to get to as an industry. And when I say as an industry, it's not only the brands. We work with brands from H&M to Chanel, the entire price point range, but also with the value chain. So from the material production to all the way through consumer and actually post-consumer. When we say we work, is we have dialogues with them to, first of all, as I was saying, educate. So one of the other stakeholders that we educated was the policy makers. We see on how, and advocating for certain activities. In our work to push for circularity also, we also created an innovation forum that we held and we hosting together with the summit. When we do the summit, basically mainly in Copenhagen, but then around the world, and we ask companies that help giving solutions to the brands to showcase their solutions. And there are many ways to become circular. The very first part, and we can elaborate that even more, is to pass from the linear model to the circular model. How that is possible, there is a need of a systemic change there, because you start from the materials and then you get to the post-consumers. So on circularity, the biggest innovation is, number one, the business models. So for example, as we were saying, the repair, resale, reuse. Finally, companies are not only considering selling the product as new and then forget about what is happening on the rest of the life cycle of the product, but starting to conceive differently products, and then what happens when the product is used from the consumers. And this is also thanks to regulations. But in terms of what can be done on the innovation side is also what can be used, avoid the waste on the post-industrial part, which is minimum part compared to the impact on the post-consumer waste. But the goal is to eliminate both. And to do that, the one thing that is needed is to create infrastructures. On the infrastructure is not only the technologies that recycle the textile, but also infrastructure on putting together the people that are the stakeholders that are responsible for this part. So in terms of post-industrial, there are more like at scale innovations, both as textile to textile, mechanical and thermochemical, so a product can become again a fabric that can be used. And finally, we're seeing that some are succeeding in producing a textile that is competitive in terms of cost to the regular fiber, because if that is not possible, then companies prefer still to go to the less expensive one. So finally, this is also because the premium that was asked to be paid to companies to use recycled textile versus the virgin textile was too high. And I say that to conclude, the goal is to decouple the growth from the use of virgin material. So we are not opposed to growth in terms of business, but the business can be done, and that's why I go back to the business model, in a way for which you can use different materials, different methodologies, different way of selling the product that is not using more materials or more land, more water, more pollution in the planet.
Well, maybe a follow-up question then for you. How close do you think we are to doing it at scale? It sounds like it's not a technological problem anymore. Is that your assessment?
I'm an optimist, I always say. I would like to say that we are closer than we really are. There are a few things for which we are closer. So, for example, one challenge, we were saying before about challenges. One of the challenge is the feedstock itself to put into the recycling so that there is enough production, and that creates more demand for recyclable products. And the EPR can maybe help solve that part for sure, but there is more a commitment of the brands and technologies that are getting better, result of the output, so the quality of the material, because people then want to have an end feel of the material that is good. So you want to sleep in a cushion that is enough comfortable. So there is still the quality, the value, price, and the use of the product that is very important. So we are finally seeing this technology advancing faster. One other challenge that we need is more capital to go into the development of these technologies. For sure, regulations are finally helping, although there is some now delays on adaptation of certain regulations, but we are considering, I'm coming from an organization that is 15 years old, right? And so I see now much closer the tipping point of accelerating action. And when we are discussing about what kind of initiative to push or to mobilize for, the lenses are, is this accelerating action or not? If not, we go to the next that is more impacting. So I would say that maybe in the next couple of years, we'll see, I don't want to say the full transformation for sure, it will take long, so 2050, but definitely by 2030, the world will be really different.
So we'll have a panel then too. Mark, do you have something you wanted to add on?
I wanted to quickly react because I also recognize a lot of the things you spoke about. For example, on the one side, the material that needs to kind of be closed in the loop, but also the change of business model and the infrastructure you need to set up for that. What I find interesting, and yesterday we spent a whole panel with the mining industry and actually kind of producers of heavy materials, and I see a lot of parallels, but I wanted to add two other perspectives there. So what you see kind of reasons for closing those loops is also that we're looking at critical raw materials, for example, for renewable energy technologies like solar and wind, but also heavy machinery. And you see that some of the producers, for example, of medical equipment or semiconductor industry, etc., are changing their business models to keep their machines within their own sphere of influence to basically hedge the price risks. So if you need to go on the global market to purchase critical raw materials, but if you keep that within your own sphere of influence, that makes that you have better availability, predictability in terms of that supply. And also there is an incentive, if you take everything back, to produce it better, to start repairing it across the lifetime, and also refurbish it. And one of the great examples there is that if you build machines and you start refurbish it, that you can have a second line of products that you push out in the market. So a whole refurbished line. Some companies call it as new. I mean, vintage, of course. I think fashion may be one of the pioneers, where a Chanel jacket, and even I saw an IKEA chair from the 70s now being on sale for a lot more. But this is really providing entrance to new markets for these machines, because you supply to markets that were in the past not able to afford your new machines, but they can afford the as new. So there are multiple elements also which play into the competitive advantage for companies as they drive circular innovations.
And if I can jump in as well, and coming back to your question, Jen, you talk about how can you scale, right? And one of the main challenges that companies are facing, and our clients are explaining to us, is how do you have executive buy-in to these ideas, right? How do they invest on circular initiatives, or even how they include circularity on their corporate strategy? And this is the way, right? This is the way to find a link between what is a sustainable impact, or the environmental impacts that you have, but also how this will affect the business. What is the business imperative behind it? What is the strategy behind it? What is the value that you're going to be able to create, right? And this can be structured in three ways. Mark was saying new revenue streams, right? We are seeing resell, refurbish, service as a service as well, many of the products. You can reduce costs, and this is efficiency that every time you can see on how to manage the materials or waste, but also in risk mitigation. And Mark was saying here as well about the supply chain resilience, but also on, as coming back to my first intervention, how to comply with everything, right? So I think companies should start tackling circularity into a more business-wise perspective, right? And with this, I believe that we can have the management buying and the executive coming on board to support this and make one corporate strategy that is circular.
Thank you. Mark, coming back to you. implementing and monitoring circularity are becoming key success factors for businesses to both remain ahead of the game and to comply with anticipated regulations. So can you talk a little bit about the work that you do around consulting, piloting, implementing, and scaling some of these practices?
Right. Well, I think, and we just spoke about indeed kind of the CSRD, which is very much a European package focused at 50,000 companies that now need to comply. So that's creating a bit of the, let's say, the early majority that also needs to start measuring circularity. What we have witnessed working with individual businesses and supply chains over the last 10 years or so, that the front runners have put it very central to create a fact base and start by measuring and doing the analysis of what is flowing in terms of materials through your operations, what are the leaks in the system, where is things becoming waste within your own influence later in the supply chain. So I would say that creating that fact base and creating that rationale is crucial for the business case, but also to convince internal stakeholders, let's say, to move. And I'm very happy to see that after 10 years of the circular economy space being a pioneering space with many different initiatives setting up. I mean, 7 years ago, we launched our first gap report here at Davos, but we have seen many initiatives, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, I think many services providers in the market. And we now see that we're at a pivotal point of harmonization. So the Global Circularity Protocol, the equivalent to greenhouse gas protocol, that starts to be that pivotal point where we harmonize. And I think that starts to go in the direction of accountable, comparable growth. So you can start developing a benchmark, see how you operate against that benchmark, track progress over time. So yeah, I think we're in an exciting space where, if I can draw the parallel again to the greenhouse gas protocol, that was also a pivotal moment of accountability and of really kind of companies coming on board, either voluntarily in terms of the front runners, but at some point also by having to comply.
Thank you. As we walk around Davos, you can't pass a building without seeing the influence of technology and artificial intelligence here. I think this theme started last year and it's amplified this year. I'd love to hear from each of you around what you think the role of technology is around circularity. Federica, starting with you.
Thank you. It's very crucial for many ways, not only, as I was saying, always starting from the materials and the innovation there. Technologies creates fabrics from the labs versus creating fabrics from the agriculture only, but also using different pesticides and chemicals, and technology can help also advance that. But going farther in terms of data, because mainly now technology is considered as the AI and data collecting, and there are two areas where I see three, but the two there are mainly is one to help data define what is the demand, so producing less and more in line on what is the demand, so there is less overproduction because of the AI can tell you more on what is the amount, volume that you should put out there. And also design with technology, so in a way this technology help also to create prototypes and products that are not will reduce the waste in creating new products that before wasn't possible. And so just to say the very first, but there are so many more application on checking for quality, so reduce also the waste on the quality, because it's an AI machine that will check that and faster and better. And then also in other practices or more sustainable down the line. But on the design part, reducing the overproduction can be really already a very crucial element.
Other thoughts, Mark?
Well, I was thinking about three elements. So clearly, and you just spoke about kind of the textile industry where it's about kind of the hard technology, just the way of kind of technically intervening. We've spoken about that. The other one is really the disclosure of data. So transparency across supply chains. Cecilia, you mentioned digital product passports. I think that will definitely be a way where you can kind of disclose and also show where in your supply chain you can optimize and drive comparability. But I think a third element that I like to point out is kind of this circular transition is as much about the head as it is about kind of the heart. So you also need to win the hearts and minds of people. And I think digital is also a great way of educating people at places in your supply chain where you previously were not able. We have a couple of programs, for example, in fashion, focused across the whole supply chain, including in Vietnam, in Bangladesh, in other parts of the world, where we use kind of serious gaming to educate people across the entire supply chain to understand what actually is the basic concept of circularity. How can I apply it in my context? So also educating and bringing people aboard, and therefore democratizing the access to the knowledge, I think, is another element where I see a lot of potential. And kind of the buzz of AI, I've seen that for a couple of years now. It goes a bit beyond me. We had a fascinating discussion over dinner yesterday. I don't know exactly what that holds, but I'm incredibly excited to learn from experts what that could be. But I'm a bit in the dark still what that is.
I suspect many of us still are. We're at the beginning of that journey.
Yeah, from the Deloitte side, we are helping our clients with joining teams, right? So the sustainability team with the artificial intelligence team or the advanced analytics, in order to get this data and cross the different variables. So what we have seen in circularity is that there are so many variables in order to take the decision. So for example, if we are investing on durability, what are the variables that we'll take into account? If it's recycled material, is the composition of the material, etc. So being able to do this analysis using technology, and we are using it as a way to making more conscious decisions, right? So helping the design teams to design for durability or design for recyclability, right? So I think technology in this case can help us drive more conscious decisions to, again, have the executive buy-in, but also accelerate this transition for circularity. So I think is a very powerful tool.
A lot of the time we talk about the successes that are happening, or maybe some of the challenges on the road to success, but we don't actually talk about failure too openly. And Federica, I'm wondering if you can share any experiences that you've seen in the work that you do around failures and what we can learn from those experiences.
Let me start from the success, because
I like success better.
I'm an optimist, and so I also try always to say I will champion the change makers instead of hammering the rest. Otherwise, my days will be really negative and bad, and you cannot do this job if you're not an optimist. So the one thing that I would like to add also in this that is connected to then the question of success and failure is that we have a program in Bangladesh. We started in Bangladesh and then also exported in order this pilot positive business case, so a success of post-industrial cotton waste. Putting together a series of stakeholders from the government to the brand, to the recyclers, to the collectors. And one of the key elements was technologies, because to put together all the materials that goes from one brand to the collectors, to the suppliers, and then be recycled was created possible because also of technology. So technologies and AI can help also facilitate this traceability on circularity. So it's truly crucial, not only for, as I was saying before, on the overproduction, but also here. So a story of success is that we could be able to prove the business case. So there is a reduction of CO2 emission, and also importation of, in that case, was cotton, and so that there is also saving for money, and we will be able to then give the program to the local people to handle and expand this program into other countries that are the largest producer of textiles. So Indonesia, Cambodia, now we're going to Vietnam and other countries. Unfortunately, together with the success, we are still in a pioneeristic time where the trials and error are still key. And so there are organizations that started were promising, could have been both in producing a new textile coming from plant-based, or circularity on technology. So some success can be the case, for example, of Re&Up. That is a new recycled technologies company based in Turkey, and they're doing textile to textile recycling, and they're producing at, as I was saying, at a cost that is competitive. And there are unfortunately examples like, for example, Renewcell. That was a company based in Sweden that didn't make it on the first run. We are now helping and mobilizing on the industry, and one of the biggest challenge there was not only getting capital to have more cash to create technologies and advance, but also have the commitment from the brands to get orders on having more tons of fibers that they were producing for recycling. So unfortunately, still, as I was saying at the beginning, the price and the margins and the quality were coming into place in a bigger way. Also because consumers, even if they want products that are coming from recycle, they're not really willing to pay the premium also. So who is paying for this premium? And this is one of the biggest issues that could be helped and faced with the new regulatory environment, where hopefully companies are eligible to incentives to then pay for that part, so that those companies will not fail, because we'll be able to stay in the business until they get to a certain volume and a certain price point that is competitive. But definitely there will be other failures, and we need to expect that. It doesn't mean that it's not the right new industry where we need to focus in terms of investment, both on the circular part, or the new materials, or new energy, because that's the way that we should conceive the future. And doing it in a competitive way is the challenge. So getting all these learnings, some failure actually help. I'm sorry to say that, but it's the way to learn and to fast track the learnings to avoid more failures in the future.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Well, this is a related question, and I'd love to hear from each of you on this, because you each have different vantage points. But developing a successful circular strategy does, as you've just pointed out, require collaboration across a variety of sectors, stakeholders. So can you share who are the most relevant from each of your vantage points, stakeholders you engage with to develop and implement circularity initiatives, and which are the key intermediaries that you think are instrumental in helping execute that circular business model? And Cecilia, maybe starting with you.
Yeah, so I think from the Deloitte point of view, we are working three main ways to enable this acceleration of the transformation, right? The first one is promoting symbiosis between industries and sectors. So we work across all industries, and we can understand and identify opportunities in the manufacture sector to recycle textiles, or we can bring hydro into, that is aluminum recycle, into, for example, a coalition with Nespresso, right, that use aluminum as well. So we can make these connections, and I think this is a very interesting point of view when we have broadened our understanding of what is the value chain and how can we make them circular. The second one is more based on our values, right, of integrity and transparency. Inside one industry, we can create this cooperative, I'm going to say like this, environment in which we can bring competitors of the same sector in order to build an alliance that enables the transformation, right? And we have examples of bringing consumer industry players to co-invest on a recycling facility for flexible packaging, right? So we are able to do this connection in a transparent way and in a cooperative way. And I think the third way that we are actually working, and I think this demonstrates, is when we join forces with sector alliances or with specific players such as circular economy, GFA, World Business Councils, in order to promote not only the knowledge, but also to understand what are the challenges and how can we unblock this challenge, right? So Deloitte is working on these three main drivers on the ecosystem to help our clients in this transformation.
Yeah, if I can respond, I think it's very much along these lines, but specifically on what circular economy also does and has been doing in this space. I would come back to providing the evidence base and also a coherent and joint vision for a sector. So late last year, we launched the first global circularity report for the fashion industry, kind of showing where the fashion industry currently stands, but more importantly, creating a compelling vision for where you should go. So I think getting the facts right, creating that common vision, and as you pointed out, Cecilia, I think it needs to move in the direction of away from more transactional relations and more kind of looking at value-driven partnerships. So across the supply chain, look at what connects you. And maybe one other example that we ran a coalition called the Capital Equipment Coalition with, again, heavy machinery producers, none of which were competitors because they were all in a different space, but the common denominator was that they were all producing heavy machinery. And what we did with them, every quarter they would go to a factory of one of these companies to show in practice what does it mean to produce in a circular way. And then I love to speak about learnings rather than failures, but quite transparently and vulnerably, these companies shared their innovation journey and what worked and what didn't work. And I think that was a crucial element of cross-learning to accelerate the transition.
Thank you.
So similar to echoing them, there are many stakeholders. In our case, the very first things that we understood, especially when I joined 3.5 years ago, and the vision was to put sustainability as the first priority and discussing the why. But most importantly, business is still always the first priority of companies, and we needed to go from the why to how and what. So pragmatically, we needed to implement some programs, and so not only educating and discussing why sustainability, but also going into, okay, what can we do and what can we showcase? On the circularity part, in our case, because we are a non-for-profit, one of the stakeholders is definitely grantor. So the grantor can be UNIDO in our case, or in governmental body, or GIZ, so a governmental body as well, and the local partners. So in the case, for example, of Bangladesh, of Indonesia, of Cambodia, so people that are on the ground that are doing the work to also, it's a cultural shift as well. So you need to also make that training and education in assessing and going to the transformation. So these are the key stakeholders at the beginning. For others can be capital, so private equities, or and then you have brands, manufacturers, collectors, recyclers, and what we were saying before is about the traceability of all of this, that is technological partners. We need to have all of those and collaborate with many brands that commit to work on a project. So we had, for example, 17 brands that each other are in a competitive space, but we create pre-competitive collaborations to this. Also, the stakeholder management is actually one of the most critical elements of the work, and then we work with other stakeholders as well, so the recyclers, the collectors, and this is the infrastructure is basically that needs to grow. And then we get to the point of having the fabric recycle in the circularity. The point is to now sell this more, so the demand needs to be higher, and that's why you need also policymakers as other stakeholders and consumers that ask for that part. So the stakeholders almost in the entire value chain, there are several.
When you say it like that, it sounds a little overwhelming, but it's good that we have organizations that are actually working on all of this together. Federica, you mentioned, you've talked about the consumer side of this a couple of times now, so I'd welcome comments from many of you, but starting with you. It does require a shift in consumer behavior to really press for some of this on the demand side. So how do you think we can best approach educating and engaging consumers to embrace it? And you see some of it starting to happen, but it's not systemic yet. So what are some of your thoughts on that?
So the very first part is that unfortunately consumers were confused by the many communication that were happening out there, because it was almost a trend to say, we are sustainable, but and maybe the practices were not really sustainable as they were mentioned. So I welcome very much the regulation, not to be complicated. Actually, we simplify complexity. That's one of the key points of my leadership act. But it is important that we transparently give to the consumer information. And so, and we can do that with data. So starting with the scientific data, and then with authentic stories, or where the product is made, where it is created. So having that and to enhance that, because we do a lot of reports. We are a thought leadership organization as well, and some of this also consider the consumer. But the summit is an educational part, and we created an assembly with the Next Gen Assembly, having young people also informing the people that are on the decision maker on how this new generation that comes from across the world are discussing about sustainability and what can be done to be more transparent with the consumers. All this regulation, as I was saying, the CSRD and so on, will oblige the company to do more. So what we can do is to also influence companies to be to comply with this and to be serious in what they are disclosing to them, and to educate on the circular model. So not only to buy the new and pushing the new to be bought, but also to buy from the product or other coming from a more sustainable way, because they are recyclable material, but also because they are resold or rent. And so the education on that, and we work with UNEP to promote a playbook that all the brands actually should read on how to communicate to consumers in a way that is compelling and it is formative without being a, sorry to say, greenwashing, because that's what we also combat.
Any other thoughts on this?
Well, maybe to build on this, I think it's good to recognize that many end consumers are actually businesses. About half of the end consumers are, and I think there's an increasing demand either for those to be compliant. I mean, if you're an architect or a construction company, and you need to have new window panes and access solutions, etc., your demands to the industry are already moving very rapidly in the direction of circular demands. When you speak about kind of consumers as we all are, I think products that have circularity don't necessarily need to speak about circularity. They just need to be better solutions. I like to sometimes speak about kind of Spotify as an example, which may actually be quite circular, because 20 years ago we had racks full of CD that had to be produced and transported all around, and now you have a better service, access to everything that was ever made in kind of a less material sense. Of course, we need data centers. I haven't done the assessment, but I would argue that there are better solutions that the consumer have, and I think one other more mind shift that I'm hopeful about, and I'm an optimist as you, is that we need to make the fundamental shift from quantity to quality. So for the last 50 or 70 years, it was all about kind of quantity, getting a lot of food or a lot of clothes, and I think we need to make the fundamental transition to appreciate quality, and I think the fashion industry is a key example of where that is already catching on.
Thank you. Cecilia, I'm cognizant of time, so you and I were talking before, and I think, you know, if companies are at the beginning of this journey, you might want to share with the group where they can start, and we can end with that on this panel today.
Perfect. Thank you, Jen. Yeah, I think for takeaway or even a toolbox, right? Companies to take into account 5 main steps or 5 main key drivers. I think the first one I have been mentioning is to create a compelling business case, to have a business imperative, to have the executive buying. This is not only one more sustainability initiative, this is a transformation of the business model, as Federica and Mark was saying before. The second part is to really align the circular principles or the circular strategies into the business model or the corporate strategy. So you don't have to do everything. You don't need to have resale, refurbish, recycle. You need to have an initiative that supports your brand and is aligned with your corporate strategy. The third thing is understand the impact that this will have in your operations. So when Federica was saying about the failures, most of them come by not understanding what is the impact that you will have in your supply chain, or even in your design, right, in your procurement. So understanding how this will shift your organization procedures, how this will shift the knowledge that you have to have inside the company, I think is really important in order to succeed in implementing these strategies. The fourth point is, we have been talking measurement, right? So you need to measure in order to report, in order to have a clear target, and even to finance, right? So private equities, banks, they need this evolution and they need the metrics in order to support this evolution. And the fifth one is find alliances, right? Find enablers that can support this circularity. You probably, and for sure GFA and circular economy can support this. It's really hard to have a success case without partners, right? So you have to bring on board enablers into this strategy. So identifying the ones that are crucial and bringing them on board, creating value to all of them, I think is really important. So I would take these 5 key takeaways in this toolbox.
And I think those are great key insights to close the session today. Thank you so much for our panelists for what you shared with us. I think there's a tremendous amount of learning coming out of this session, and hopefully this inspires the members of our audience here to do more within their organizations, and certainly connections to help make that happen, as it does take quite a bit of work across the value chain. So thank you so much to our panelists and to our audience today. Appreciate you joining the session.
Thank you for joining.